Hey everyone, welcome back. This week we got to check out director Mauro Ivan Ojeda's, sorry about my Spanish pronunciation, latest horror movie, The Funeral Home, distributed by Uncorked Media. The story follows a family of three. Bernardo, played by Machín, an insecure man running a funeral home out of the same building that him and his family live in. His new wife, Estelle, played by Celeste Gerez, does her best to keep up the dilapidated building and property, but she has her own issues to deal with. Estelle's daughter, Arana, played by Camila Vaccarini, doesn't care for Bernardo or living in a funeral home, but, who can blame her? The family is visited by spirits that they attribute to the fact that they live in a funeral home. They call in a medium or a shaman of sort to help keep these spirits at bay out of their living spaces, but when these boundaries start to be broken and Bernardo is tired of receiving cryptic messages and having a malevolent spirit telling him what to do all the time, he tries to get to the bottom of things once and for all. The movie kicks off with an eerie tone, and that creepy feeling follows throughout the majority of the film. There is little to no levity to break the tension. The eerie tone never becomes terrifying or outright horror, which is a bit of a letdown, but it also doesn't lean on cheap jump scares. Not falling into that gimmick was much appreciated. I thought the concept of a family living with their business and dealing with spirits as a side effect was an interesting one. I wish this was explored a little bit more. I never saw a compelling reason as to why the family stayed and lived the way they did. There's some talk of it between the characters at times, but I never felt like I got a satisfying answer. When the medium, Ramona, is brought in, there are some flashback scenes that fill in gaps in the story, but these don't seem to bring enough of a reason to the family staying either. If that concept had been explained and had been developed further, some of the stretches toward the end or how certain characters showed up later on could have made a lot more sense. The ending feels abrupt. It ties up some things that are mentioned for the characters, but it falls short on satisfying since the build to it was on the thin side. The score, on the other hand, composed by Jeremiah Smith, is a standout for the movie. It's an unyielding tension builder that takes inspiration from some of the more iconic horror scores, without ever sounding like a copy. Along with the score, Ojeda has some cool tricks up his sleeve in his minimalist approach to showing the horror. Less is always more when it comes to horror movies, if you ask me. Glimpses of a corpse, drastic lighting changes, and interesting angles inside the house all showcase a director with an eye for horror. While Ojeda had the soundtrack and the look of the movie down, he could have used a little bit more polish on the script itself. Even with some of the extra background information delivered later in the movie, I felt like I walked into a screening half an hour late. I didn't ever get the family dynamic. I didn't get why Estelle was given certain bits of backstory without being explored or coming back in later on. There's a running subplot of Arana wanting to go live with the grandmother. As an audience member, I understood not wanting to live in a clearly haunted funeral home, and Estelle makes mention that the grandmother is manipulative and really not a good person. Arana eventually goes to the grandmother for about 5 minutes, before returning for the climax of the movie. The reason to bring her back in does fold into the plot, but this whole diversion wasn't fully realized when it came time for the third act. That's just one example, but it seemed to me that all the time spent on that dynamic could have fleshed out the story a little bit more. Without this being the strongest script, take some of my criticisms with a grain of salt. I found at times that the subtitles were a little jumbled and not entirely clear. I lost track of some full sentences trying to suss out the meaning of what was going on. Not having every last line in itself may not make the movie confusing, but I'm wondering how much more might have been lost in translation. After premiering at the famed Fantasia Film Festival, The Funeral Home is now available on VOD. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe to our channel. We have a ton more interviews and a ton more new movie coverage coming your way. You aren't going to want to miss out. Remember to listen to So Is Your Podcast every week wherever you get your podcasts. So Is Your Podcast can also be found on Patreon, where for as little as $1 a month, you get multiple monthly bonus shows. SoIsYourPodcast.com is your resource for reviews, recommendations, merchandise, and more. We love hearing feedback, so drop us a note in the comments or contact us on social media. All of our accounts can be found after the show and in the show notes. Thanks again.